Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar which is broadcast every Thursday at 11 a.m. I am Serhat and this week's topic is situations affecting detector mounting according to EN 5414 standards. Today's subtopics are detectors mounting in flat ceilings, effect of ceiling irregularities on detector mounting, detector mounting in suspended ceilings, detector mounting in raised floors, cloud of smoke collecting down from the ceiling, effect of walls or partitions on detector mounting in ventilation ducts, and effect of airflow on detector mounting. Here you can see for the old standards, in case there is a cold boundary layer on the ceiling, the detector should not be completely buried in the ceiling and should be mounted within the upper 5% of the room height in order for the detection elements inside the smoke detectors to work properly. Detectors should not be installed with sensitive elements 10 mm below the ceiling and detectors 150 mm below the ceiling for smoke detectors. For the new standard, in general, the performance of heat or smoke detectors depends on the presence of a ceiling above the detectors. For this reason, detectors should be placed so that the sensitive elements are 25 mm below the ceiling and at the top 10% of the room height. Also, detectors should not be installed 600 mm below the ceiling for smoke detectors or 150 mm below the ceiling for heat detectors. Effect of ceiling irregularities on detector mounting. For the old standards, detectors should be mounted within the upper 5% of the room height. In ceilings with beams, if the beam height is less than 5% of the ceiling height, the ceiling should be considered flat and radius limits applied. For the new standard, ceilings with irregularities with a depth of less than 10% of ceiling height should be treated as if they were flat and radius limits of 6.5.2 should be applied. For ceiling irregularities, any ceiling irregularity, such as joists, the depth of more than 10% of ceiling height should be considered a wall and the following conditions will apply. If the depth between the irregularities bigger than 1.25 meters, we should put detector in each cell. And if this depth lower than 0.25, we should put detector in every second cell. And if this depth lower than 0.13, we should put one detector per 3 cells, as you can see in this screen. For D is the distance between the beams measured from outside to outside. And uppercase H is the ceiling height and lowercase h is the depth of the beam. These values are in meters. For the old standards, if the ratio of lowercase h and uppercase h is less than 5%, the ceiling is considered flat and the detectors are mounted according to the detection radius values. If the ratio of lowercase h and uppercase h is greater than 5%, the ceiling is considered inclined and the detectors are installed by increasing the detection radius values by 1% for each degree of ceiling slope. Detection radius values can be increased up to maximum of 25%. But for the new standards, if the protected area has a pitched roof, detectors should be placed at each vertex. If the height difference between the bottom of the sloping ceiling and the top of the hill is less than 60 centimeters, the roof is treated as a flat if smoke detectors are used. The sloping ceiling, if the difference between the upper point and the lower point is greater than 60 centimeters, the ceiling is considered to be inclined, and the detectors are installed by increasing the radius values by 1% for each degree of ceiling slope. Radius values can be increased up to a maximum of 25%. Detector mounting in suspended ceilings. If there is a risk of fire on the suspended ceiling, fire detectors, at least one in each independent place, should be mounted on suspended ceiling. In cases where the cables in the suspended ceiling are fire resistant, if the flammability of the cables at any point exceeds 25 megajoule, a detector is used in the suspended ceiling. In cases where the cables are not fire resistant, if the flammability amount exceeds 15 megajoule, a detector is used in the suspended ceiling. Detector mounting in raised floors. Gaps, including underfloor and overhead cavities, need to be protected with detectors only if there is a likely to be widespread of fire or smoke outside the relevant space before the fire is detected by detectors outside the space. If a fire in a cavity is likely to damage the emergency system wiring before the fire is detected. Detectors placement in walls, partitions, and obstacles. Detectors, except optical beam smoke detectors, should not be installed closer than 50 cm from any wall or partition. If the room is narrower than 1 meter, the detector can be applied at or near the center of the width. If rooms are divided into sections by walls, partitions, or shelves extending up to 30 cm ceiling, the sections should be considered as reaching the ceiling, and each section should be considered as a separate room. A space of at least 50 cm should be left in all directions under each detector. Dimensions of such a hole must be compatible with the particular detectors in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Detector mounting in ventilation ducts. Air duct smoke detectors must comply with EN 5427. To avoid the effects of air turbulence, smoke detectors or probes should be installed in a straight duct extension, nearest bend, corner, or at the distance of up to 3 times the width of the joint. You can see on the picture as well. Effect of airflow on detector mounting. For the old standards, Particular attention should be paid to effects on airflow on detector if the detector is placed within 1 meter of any air intake or in area with airflow greater than 1 meters second. For the new standards, point detectors should not be installed within 0.5 meter of any high velocity weather grill where the air velocity is greater than 0.5 meter per second. Numbering of detectors. The control and indication equipment may have the ability to individually recognize the detector or alarm button that the alarm is given. In this case, a method should be provided to ensure that the indicator of the control and indicating equipment is associated with the relevant detector. If detector tags are used to provide the necessary cross relationship between detectors, alarm buttons, and control and indicating equipment, identification numbers or letters must be added or adjacent to detectors and alarm buttons that reproduce the indications provided on the controller. Thank you for your participation to our webinar. If you have a question, you can feel free to ask me from chat box, and we are hoping to see you next week's webinars. Thank you.